session in a few minutes. We are now waiting for people to log on. We will begin shortly. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Tom McDermott, Regional Resource Director for Caron Treatment Centers in the Greater Pennsylvania region. Thank you for joining us today for our fifth webinar in the series, The View from the Mountain. In response to these uncharted times, we at Caron are here to share our experiences and our tools with you in the hopes that it will help you and your clients. As a reminder, this session will be in webinar format, which means all microphones will be muted. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the session using the Q&A feature. Our topic today will focus on two of the most vulnerable populations during the COVID-19 pandemic, our teens and our young adults. Joining us today from our Pennsylvania campus is Dave Rothenburg, Executive Vice President and Chief Clinical Officer, and from our Florida campus, Jonathan Saltzburg, Executive Director of College Success Services. We will begin by checking in with Dave on how teens and young adults have been susceptible to substance abuse in the midst of this pandemic. And then we will hear from Jonathan on how our academic programming has been going for this population. We will then move on to questions that were submitted during the registration process. And lastly, we will move on to our questions that were asked during the live feed using the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We will do our best to answer all questions. However, any unanswered questions will be answered individually by a member of our team. I now give you Dave Rothenburg.
Thank you, Tommy, and thanks everyone for joining us. I'm humbled and honored to be a part of this, and my friends in business development told me that over 300 of you are registered today with us, which is an incredible number, especially since we're not giving you free food or continuing ed credits, and you're just choosing to join us. So again, thank you so much for being here during this unprecedented time, as Tom mentioned. I've been the Chief Clinical Officer at Caron for several years. I've worked here for 24 years, and for over half of those, I was in direct care with adolescent and young adult patients, 4 years in outpatient, 4 years in student assistance, and another 8 in clinical supervision and administration of adolescent and young adult residential. I can never remember a time where everyone, I would say, is, if I could borrow a phrase from a book title, everything is illuminated. And what I mean is everything is more, it's intense, unprecedented for the third time already this morning will be said. There's just more of everything. When I think about COVID-19 and the times that we find ourselves in, I think about the adolescent who's already knee-deep in drug and alcohol usage and who has co-occurring psychiatric issues. I picture them in their home at this moment, sort of like a caged tiger, walking back and forth, wondering, shall I be aggressive? Shall I act out? The other people in the home with them, their family, nervously anticipating the next move, what might happen, what might be the result of their interaction. And I think about the need for treatment and, sorry, are we on? The need for treatment more than ever at this moment. Why not treatment right now? One of the thoughts coming in was, should people even entertain the notion of treatment? And for us at Caron, I'm proud to say that not only are we entertaining the notion of treatment, we're actively taking patients on a daily basis. In fact, between Monday and Thursday of this week, we have 18 patients scheduled. And I think it's important to emphasize that every patient coming into Caron is getting COVID-19 tested. And so, in fact, I can tell you, audience, that we've tested the last 86 admissions that have come to Caron have been tested for COVID-19. 85 of them have been negative. One female was caught on admission positive and quarantined. She's still with us. She was quarantined for her first 8 days of care, and now she has successfully matriculated into the adolescent and young adult female unit here seamlessly. She still has depression and drug addiction, but she's COVID-free. And I think our ability to manage that at this moment, at this critical juncture in the history of our industry, is a huge source of pride for me and for those of us at Caron. Someone has to be responsible at a residential level to continue to take patients who need detox and other higher levels of care. And frankly, some of our friends in the industry have had a hard time. There's residential placements shutting down, not taking patients from certain regions, not having the ability to navigate the potentially COVID-19 patients. So when they get symptoms, they have to be discharged. And for us to be able to do that is a real source of pride. I will say that our relationship with a local lab, where our turnaround time for COVID results is between 12 and 24 hours, has been a huge plus for us. So again, as I look into the audience without being able to see you, I say that why not treatment? It's more important to have treatment now than ever before. Everything is illuminated, as I said earlier. Levels of depression greater. Those people who are already anxious are going to be doubly anxious. Those people who are not typically anxious now have something a lot, in fact, to be anxious about. You can see national statistics on drinking escalating. You can see national stats on marijuana usage escalating. You can bet that at this moment, parent-child conflict is escalating, along with depression, anxiety, and other drug and alcohol use. And so it behooves us as a treatment provider community to keep our doors open, to keep our screens open, and in the case of me, where I sit in Pennsylvania, to keep our residential lights on and be front and center. Because as we know, addiction doesn't care if there's COVID-19. In fact, it would love to be a part of COVID-19 and take people over the edge the wrong way, if you can allow me to personify it for a second. So I'm sure I'll speak more about these issues and then some in the Q&A portion. But I'm thrilled to be joined by my colleague in Florida, Executive Director of College Success, Jonathan Saltzburg. Jonathan?
Thank you, Dave. And let me just do this. It's such a pleasure to be here. I was listening to you speak, and it reinvigorates me to continue doing the incredible work we do. Kind of 10 years ago, for all of you who are joining, 10 years ago in 2010, we launched the College Success Program at Caron Renaissance. And my background is that I had the opportunity to work in admissions at Florida Atlantic University, which is a state university in Florida, and I also had the opportunity to work in graduate admissions at the Wharton School of Business of University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And prior to that, I had experience working in the corporate world, but kind of my passion was always education and helping students with all different backgrounds be able to access their higher education. In 2010, the idea was really to look at how we can work with students that are in a treatment center or in a behavioral health care center, be able to access their higher education so that they can see that there's hope out there, and that they're getting well, and and the ability to go back to school is on the table. And how do we support these students going back to school and addressing their educational plan? And I'm pleased to report that over the past 10 years, we've seen over 250 students return to universities and colleges throughout the country, and really be able to support collegiate recovery and other support services on campus. But now we're in a time where we're seeing these students and we're working with these patients, and they have an opportunity to do education while they're in our level of care. But one of the great opportunities was that they were able to actually be in school, go to school while in IOP, while in a level of care, be able to be in a brick and mortar school, be able to experience the pressures of high school and college, right? Depending on whether they're teen or young adult, and be able to process it clinically as it comes up. And how do we work with that environment now when no longer are they actually going to school physically, but actually they're going to school virtually. So really, we see school and academics as a clinical opportunity to help address the coping mechanisms that our clients need. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the cohort of students that I'm working with down here in Florida and my colleagues in Pennsylvania, and how our students, our young adults, are coping and addressing this new world that we're all dealing with. Already we're hearing schools, most schools are going to an online platform for the summer, and it's looking that way. Don't quote me on that, for the fall. With that comes a lot of loss. The students that were going to be freshmen are no longer going to be freshmen anymore. They're going to be freshmen in a whole different light. They're not going to have the freshman experience that we had. Students in recovery that have schools that have recovery housing programs and collegiate recovery and other mental health and support services on campus. How are those students going to get it now when they're no longer going to be on campus? So we're going to talk about some challenges and also some opportunities today that we're seeing in this field. But we're in an unprecedented time, and it's so important, I want to stress, for this population to have access to higher education, to have access to education, for it to build self-esteem, and it builds character. And the platform of which they're receiving it can vary, and we'll talk about how we're working with that today. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you so much. Now go back.
Dave and Jonathan, thank you. Thank you both very much. So now we're going to move into the question and answer. And Dave, I'm going to start off with you. So it's kind of a two-part question. How does the pandemic impact mental health? And how do you think people are managing the increased depressive symptoms and other mental health issues in teens feeling isolated?
Thanks, Tommy. By the way, Jonathan, your hair looks tremendous. Tell your wife she did a wonderful job with your haircut.
Correct. I got a hair. My wife gave me a haircut, so I'm very, very proud of that.
Anyway, Tommy, thanks for the question. Audience, thank you for the question. I think that the pandemic is going to have, and I touched on it in my intro, a profound effect on levels of depression and anxiety in our teen and young adult population, and frankly, in their family systems. They're already the number 1 and 2, that is mood disorder and anxiety, are the number 1 and 2 disorders that we see of patients entering Caron of all ages. So you're going to see a pronounced increase in those issues because kids are isolated, lonely, angry. Jonathan talked about, seniors in high school are missing out. Sophomores in high school are missing their friends. Sophomores in high school are stuck at home with moms and dads that they don't necessarily want to be around. So in addition to depression, anxiety, parent-child conflict is going to escalate. You're seeing also that parents, not just kids, but parents also in the home with them are going to be suffering from job loss, increased anxiety, increased parental drinking and drug use. And so you're going to have a synergistic effect, Tommy and audience, within the home life that goes back to what I said originally, which is that now more than ever, our treatment provider community is going to be needed and is going to be needed to be called upon at every level of care because of that synergy, okay? In the past, if dad were an alcoholic but employed, he would at least be out of the house for 8 to 10 hours a day and then bring his pathology back home, if you will. And I don't mean to be cheeky or sarcastic. Now, picture alcoholic dad in the home, pissed off about losing his job or being furloughed, increasingly leaning on more booze, and then picture the kid and the dad having more conflict and the kid not having his usual outlets, which is leaving the home, hanging out with other peers, and even if negative, still at least departing from the environment. And so again, the synergistic effect is going to be, to me, a time where all of us who do treatment are going to need to be on high alert and be in tune with the home dynamic and that synergistic effect that I've repeated now twice as a result. Could you repeat the second part of the question, Tommy, or did I answer it?
I believe you answered it. That was great. Thank you. One more for you, Dave. How do you think teens and young adults are handling the pandemic, and are they taking it serious?
Obviously, we've seen enough media to know that, within the past several weeks or month and a half, certain young adults and teens did not take it seriously in the beginning. And you needed sort of some jurisdictional interventions and government interventions. No, I think the stats certainly, again, in the beginning, made it feel like this was a problem much more for old people, and elderly people were much more vulnerable. That may be true, but it's clear now that teens and young adults have gotten some impact, less, but some, and certainly need to take this more seriously in terms of spreading the virus, and frankly, attending to the fact that adolescents and young adults by history all feel like they're invulnerable and bulletproof. It's true when it comes to their drug and alcohol usage. It's true when it comes to texting and driving. It's true when it comes to wearing seatbelts, and it's true with COVID-19. So no, I don't think they've taken it, like everything else in life, Tommy, as seriously as the adults in the room. And if you would, they need to sober up a little bit in relation to the issue.
Thank you, Dave. This one's for you, Jonathan. So somebody submitted, I work with high school students remotely at this time, would like to give them some ideas in coping and handling the pandemic.
So, with working with high school students, I think that it's important to consider the impact and the importance that they have their own workspace, particularly around their own space it's hard because some people don't have their own computers. If your student that you're working with does have their own computer, has the ability to be in their own space and to be able to really process and be able to really have a to-do list and have time set aside. If you are a therapist working with them, What we're trying to do is look at how much time they're allocating to school. My sister is in Maine, for instance, and all they need is 2 hours a day of schoolwork, and that counts as a day of school. So, I mean, kind of what I take from that is kind of working with your student to kind of determine what makes a really solid school day and looking at how they're journaling and how they're documenting their time. So one of the exercises that we've had is working with our students throughout the week to say, okay, this is the time you're going to be allocating to school. 10 to 1, this is your time. This is your time. You're gonna set up this workspace wherever this workspace is, and you're gonna be, here, and you're going to be working on English/math. I mean, we really work with them to have specific measurable goals of what needs to be achieved. So I think really specific goals work with this population, and also validation. And after they go through this work, we really validate and say, hey, look, you did this, you did that. Let's look at your little journal for the time you spent. Coping mechanisms, as far as, one of the challenges is kind of a number of ways to address your question, is that some schools are offering live education where you're actually able to access it through Google Drive. You're seeing live access, live notes. Other schools are not doing it that way, where they're just providing pre-recorded lectures, whether that's through a virtual classroom or through other curriculum. Obviously one of the challenges that we're seeing is equity. And what I mean by that is, some families or some students aren't able to have their own computer and need to use and share their parents' computers. Therefore, their parents are, again, another challenge Dave is saying, mom and dad are working from home now, right? They're having to use the family computer during the day that son or daughter needs to be working on education. So it's not that easy to figure out, oh, what's the structure? What does that look like? So it's really, what I would say is, it's really individualized and looking at what the barriers and the obstacles are for the student to be able to have some structure. Looking at what the structure can be, what the barriers are, and how to work with them to support a structured schedule each week. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So Dave, how does quarantine and social isolation impact teens and young adults in their ability to stay sober?
I mean, I think it has a significant impact, Tommy. I think teens and young adults who already have a pre-existing substance use disorder are now finding themselves isolated from positive peers and maybe negative peers too. As I mentioned earlier, the most likely place to find another person with drug and alcohol and mental health issues for a recovering kid is in their own home. And so I think, again, the quarantine issue and being surrounded by family, if the family's sober and productive and the parents are cohesive and everything's fine, that's great. But if you have a kid in a home where the rest of the system is untreated, what possible chance will that girl or boy have of maintaining their own sobriety and emotional behavioral stability? Okay, and so that to me is a significant issue. The other piece, we all agree that the most important piece for teens and young adults, but teens, is their peers. Are they able to spend time with peers? Are they able to spend time, in the case of a newly sober teen, with other sober people? And the answer is not exactly, except online. I think one of the advantages we have, Tommy, and audience at Caron, is we actually have a full house of teens right now, girls and boys, and they're actually able to have face-to-face contact. So they have, to me, a distinct advantage right now of a built-in positive peer culture that's a little bit more challenging to build in the COVID-19 world. The other thing, Tommy, is I think you could ask another question in relation to that, which is that what are the parents willing to do? What are parents and other family members of teens in recovery willing to do in the shared responsibility that is recovery? And to me, this is a really interesting opportunity for the creative clinical folks among us to challenge parents. And what I would say right now, mom and dad have never had a better time to check out their own recovery if they're willing. If you have a teen who's trying to get sober, mom, dad, clinical team that's working with mom and dad, you need to be challenged to quit drinking, to discontinue smoking. You know, you, mom and dad, in an isolated bubble have never had a better ability to be empathic to a kid in treatment or newly sober, because that kid feels like he's contained, he might be feeling isolated or discontented, and now all of a sudden mom and dad can understand what that bubble feels like. Mom and dad now can understand what it feels like to be asked to make 180-degree changes, to make every major lifestyle change that we ask of a kid, mom and dad can now feel. And so I think it behooves us as clinicians, as leaders, to challenge mom and dad on their own habits. Are mom and dad able to read the big book with the kid, like we're asking the kid? Are mom and dad able to develop a support system, like we're asking the kid? The old excuse of I don't have time, or I have to go to work, or I have to take care of everything, this and that out of the house, is no longer relevant in a huge percentage of cases. And so there's a real creative opportunity here that we as a clinical community should explore. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So similar question, but for you, Jonathan, how are students in recovery getting support when they are no longer in their recovery support system?
So thank you, Tom. So one of the things that I'm so proud of is that, you know, over the past 10 years, when I first started at Caron, there were about 30 universities throughout the country that had some sort of collegiate recovery program. What does that mean? What is a collegiate recovery program? The idea behind it is having a cohort of like-minded individuals together on a college campus that have classes together, that live together, that have meetings together, that have designated space together, that staff together, like a real supportive model. And it was really built, I really compare it a lot to what universities do with living learning communities, LLCs. So there was a lot of research to back what they were doing. And we saw these support systems in place at these universities that students in recovery were able to graduate at higher rates, where retention rates were higher, GPAs were higher, all these incredible things because of this infrastructure of these recovery support services, as you call it, Tom. And now these universities, these students who are, you know, a vulnerable population are now back at their family's house or back at their house, and that community support they no longer have. So what universities throughout the country are offering, and they're doing different things. One of the things that some universities are doing are offering student lounges through Zoom or through WebEx or through other things, where it's kind of a neat idea is that, hey, we don't have a drop-in center now. You know, maybe a drop-in center at a university for students in recovery is a place where if you're struggling or you had a bad class or, you know, you get triggered, you can go into this drop-in center, this little space where there's another student who's in recovery. You can just connect with them, and it's a wonderful idea for that support, peer-to-peer support. And what they did to try to model it was they created a virtual lounge, right? So it's through Zoom where anyone can just stop in, and there's someone always there, not always there, but a lot of times there's someone who's on there and available to speak, to connect with someone. So they're trying to do a kind of a virtual connection. Obviously, there's the association. For those that don't know, there's an association Association of Recovery and Higher Education. That's an association, the only association that really establishes best practices for collegiate recovery programs, and they do a lot of incredible education and research. They've established support services virtually, as well as Safe Campus that has incredible resources and support, where there's online virtual meetings just for students in recovery. So there's more and more availability, but again, it's all virtual at this point.
Thank you. So Dave, you mentioned earlier that the adolescents on campus are in school. Is there actually a high school on campus?
We do have a high school on campus, Tommy, as you know, but we also have distance learning capability now, and obviously more important than ever, to have the ability to do stuff online and from a distance. So currently our kids still go to the high school 2 hours a day, not the whole day. You know, these kids are in residential treatments. They do 2 hours in the school per day, keep up with their classwork, keep up with their home school's expectation. And then they have a third hour where they do physical fitness in our fitness and wellness center. Again, we have a distinct advantage where gyms all over the country have been closed, but here at the residential site, because of our containment and our testing procedures, and frankly, our medical leadership, we've been able to keep a gymnasium open. And I know coping skills and how to deal with recovery and increasing depression and anxiety, not to mention cravings and sleep, are some of the questions that you might ask as an audience. Physical fitness for the adolescent population is an enormous part of our milieu management. In fact, boys and girls they can do up to twice a day in our gymnasium. That impacts mood in such a positive way. It impacts appetite, nutrition in a positive way. It reduces cravings, does physical fitness. It helps with sleep patterns, and it really, really helps with milieu management. And so we're the de facto parents. It makes complete sense then that a COVID-19 treatment plan in the home has a significant dose, if you will, of physical fitness and exercise. So that's my long-winded way of answering your high school question, Tommy. I hope I did.
We wouldn't want you to answer your questions any other way, Dave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jonathan, what is a collegiate recovery community?
Oh, thanks, Tom. I think I kind of spoke to it last time. My last kind of answer, and I'll just go back through it, is a collegiate recovery community is a program, a community that's on campus. It's a cohort of like-minded individuals working together on a daily basis on a college campus, staying sober and engaging in recovery behavior. That's the way I look at it. There's a lot of great definitions and research out there, but essentially, I compare it to what they developed years ago. We'll call living learning communities, LLCs. The idea behind an LLC, a living learning community, was that an example would be students that you were going into your freshman year and you were a business major, and you're going into this huge school with all these different people, and they created this living learning community where you would live and learn around the students with common majors. So you're a business major, you'd live with other business majors. You'd have classes, all your huge 250 person classes, you'd have that cohort of individuals that were business majors that you have 12 or 15 people that you knew were in that class that you could hang out with, connect with, right? You would have an additional study skills group each week where you would meet with them, and there would be someone who would, a group leader that would facilitate these groups. So the idea of a learning community, we saw these huge retention and graduation rates. And the idea of a collegiate recovery community, I really believe, has a lot of the same core elements, which is, it's students in recovery. They have that the commonality. They in some cases go to classes together. They actually have class selection where they're able to be in the same class together. They have recovery housing, where it's a safe, supportive environment where they can live. That is not only offers the ability for them to feel safe, but creates meetings each week where they're able to meet as a group. They have designated staff there that meet with them to see how they're doing. It's a number of elements but the key piece is the recovery piece, but the key piece is to promote a better learning environment for these students. In a lot of cases, some of these schools have actual academic advisors that specialize working with students in recovery who actually get the context of recovery. In some schools, they actually have admissions officers that are working with students in recovery that may, because of educational disruption due to mental health and other areas, they're able to still gain acceptance even though their GPA may not fit the mold. So it's really, when you say collegiate recovery, it encompasses so many different things. So, and it's very exciting.
I can tell. Thanks, Jonathan. The one reoccurring theme that we've been seeing with questions is about motivation and motivation. So Jonathan, somebody wrote in that they have an 11th grader and a sophomore in college, both adapting to online classes with no motivation. What are some tips? And do you foresee any challenges when these students start going back into the schools and the colleges and universities after being online for so long?
Wow, that's a great question. Motivation is a challenge for us, even when we're not in this situation, right? For motivating our teens, from what my experience has been. And trying to set specific goals, even though I said that earlier, it's a lot easier said than done, right? Just because you set a goal, how do you get them to execute that goal and see the carrot, the carrot, the reward down the road? A few things. One is I want to go back to Dave's discussion around exercise. I mean, exercise is, as much as I do not like hearing it all the time, exercise is the most incredible opportunity for us to address as one of the best remedies as an antidepressant. It's one of the best remedies to get us motivated, energy. I mean, there's so many things to exercise. So building that into their routine is huge. And maybe giving them, the student, the ability to say, listen, okay, maybe you exercise before I'm going to give you this time. You exercise instead of 10 o'clock is school time. 10 o'clock is exercise time, right? 10 to 11, we'll start school at 11. With 10th and 11th graders, it's hard for them. It's even harder now for them to see the big picture. And what I mean by the big picture is seeing that this is going to lead to college and lead to greater things. And it's even more of an ability now for, as a 10th grader and 11th grader, to rationalize the fact that, what do I have to do school for? I mean, there's not even school. I mean, what do I have to do school for? I mean, there's no, I mean, who knows when we're going back to school? I mean, all these different externalized blame, rationalization. So the key piece is throwing in exercise into that routine. The key piece is holding them accountable, right? Which Dave can speak to. How do you hold kids accountable in this kind of system now? But holding them accountable to, listen, you need to get this much amount of work done, or else you're not able to enjoy the rewards in this other sense. So I think that you need to set boundaries, but boundaries are only good if you're willing to enforce these boundaries. So which is difficult. But motivation is a challenge that we always deal with. So exercise is huge. Having some validation and something set up so that if they do achieve their goals for the week, that there is some sort of validation time, there is some sort of reward per se. For adolescents, I do think that reward piece is huge. For young adults, it's kind of like, well, we all have adult responsibilities now, this is part of the world. But for adolescents and teens, it's important for them to be validated. So thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Dave, this one's for you. Oh, no, go ahead, Dave.
If I could add to what he just said, that goes directly to what I said earlier about the adults in the home looking and making their own changes, and that us as clinicians reinforcing that. If you want a kid, a young person, to be motivated to change, while mom or dad or sister or brother can sit in the home and not change right in front of their eyes, why would they? And so the objective on our part is to increase motivation for change. And one of the fundamental rules of treatment is that the kid is always pissed off because he or she is the identified patient, while everyone else gets to go on their merry way. And if you can show them a living, breathing example of the rest of the family and their willingness to change, or at least consider it, you can also alter the motivation level in a positive way.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to throw this one to you as well, Dave. So what are some possible good outcomes of teens and young adults being in quarantine?
I think now I'm going to sound like a broken record, Tommy. I just said it. If I'm in quarantine as a kid and I'm newly sober, trying to be so, and my parents and siblings join me, there's a potential positive synergy to offset the negative synergy I explained 20 minutes ago. There's a real upside there. Obviously, kids, some of the fundamental rules of home life seem easier to get to now. I know in my own home, there's more family dinners, that old cliche, that's happening. There's more dialogue. I see my children, and I have a lot of children in my home, they're not all on the internet or the phone all the time. They've gone back to some play and weightlifting and fitness and some other stuff that they had gotten away from. So I do think there's also some creative ideas. I think the field itself is going to get more adept at telemedicine, and already is as a result of this. Listen, that's not the only answer, but we know that that'll reach more people. Okay, the fact is, if you can do telemedicine effectively as an industry, that's not going to save everyone, and that's not going to have a profound effect on everyone, but that's going to reach more people, Tommy. I think, too, the ability to do 12-step meetings and parent support groups online versus actually having to drive to these places and showing up, that's, for some people, a draw. It's easier to do a support group online versus fidgeting your way into your first meeting. For some people, the entryway into change might be enhanced as a result of COVID-19 and some of the technological advances.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
So Jonathan, what resources can you provide around cell phone, gaming, social media addiction?
It's interesting you asked that. You know, we at Caron Renaissance have developed a digital use disorder track, and actually, you know, we could show a chart of how those who are how the brain responds to digital use is very similar to how the brain responds to the addicted brain responds to the drug of choice. So it's very interesting. So we worked with Dr. Clifford Sussman, who's very renowned in this area, to develop a track specifically for the digital use disorder, which is recognized by the World Health Organization. So as far as what resource can we provide around cell phone, gaming, media addiction, I mean, again, we have a specific track in place to support this. And please recognize that this is a recognized a disorder and needs to be addressed and needs to be treated with the utmost attention. So creating what we do here at Caron Renaissance, and I don't know that much about it because I'm not involved with it directly, is really looking at a detox period similar to what we would look at with taking someone going off of drugs and alcohol, but also similar to someone who has an eating disorder and other areas. Social media, digital use is part of our lives, right? So you can't just say, hey, it's no longer part of our lives. How do you reintegrate them back into it in a healthy and help to work on the relationship with this digital platform? So as far as resources, I mean, there are more and more 12-step support meetings that are being developed around it. Again, more and more treatment centers we hope to see are behavioral health centers looking to treat this as a chronic disorder that needs a long-term solution to it. So please keep posted and look to our upcoming webinar. Actually, we're going to be having a webinar through Caron on digital use disorder that will really address that in much more detail with much more knowledgeable individuals than myself. So thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Tommy, if I could add to that, I think the overarching theme when it comes to digital use disorder, sex addiction, gambling, internet abuse, the theme is not necessarily a Caron theme, although we do some of those things very well, meaning treatment of co-occurring issues, AID, addiction interaction disorder issues very well. I think the theme for us as a treatment community is you absolutely have to have concurrent treatment of these particular issues. I think the old template, even well into the 90s and early 2000s, was you didn't necessarily touch gambling or digital use or internet or sex addiction while the patient was in treatment for drug and alcohol. You left that alone for later. Well, that's akin to sending the patient out with a built-in relapse trigger. It behooves us as leaders in the field to tackle those issues concurrently, just like you would depression, anxiety, or any other co-occurring disorder. And to not do so is to fall short on the treatment plan. Thank you.
So Dave, here's a question for you. Is the isolation limiting access to drugs and alcohol for addicted teens and young adults? And if so, what's the impact?
I think, so, you know, the wise ass in me wants to say something like, well, now you're just gonna go steal your dad's booze or your mom's pills or your sister's weed, right? But I can actually say that with a straight face, because that's the other piece. So the law of supply and demand, if I'm a drug addict, not in recovery, COVID-19 is a secondary piece. I am getting what I need. And if I can't get it because of a quarantine or because I can't, you know, my connection was at school in the past, I'm going to take it from my family. And so the synergistic piece and the escalation of conflict is very real and very significant, okay? And that's what I mean. I don't know how in some houses that's gonna end up in anything other than an all-out brawl and an escalation in conflict, okay? The other piece is if it's not in the home and I'm an untreated addict, I'm absolutely gonna leave the home to take care of my needs. And if I'm a kid walking around with poor impulse control, poor executive functioning, inability to maintain good judgment, I'm gonna not only not social distance, I'm gonna put multiple people at risk with my behavior to fulfill my objective, which in this case is drug taking, Tommy. So there's multiple ways you can go at this. And that again highlights the need for the family systems approach that I've been saying over and over. This is the fourth time I'm talking about the family system. If the family system is not cohesive and addressed, there's no chance that a kid, an identified patient, is going to be able to maintain sobriety or the expectation that there's going to be some kind of family cohesion is out of touch with what's actually going to happen.
And I just want to clarify that when we do talk about family systems, that we are talking about any type of family system. So that could be a mother, a father, a single family, two fathers, two mothers, whomever. Just want to clarify that.
Absolutely
so Dave,
right. It doesn't have to be a traditional family system, but it's essentially who lives in the home with you. The
right.
family system, in my definition right now, is whoever's in the home. And is the home a safe place? Is the pathology limited? Does the kid and the rest of the family and the system have an actual chance at emotional behavioral control?
Thanks, Dave. Dave, so what's your view on 12 steps for young people and how would they utilize the 12-step model during these difficult times?
I mean, if I'm honest, Tommy, 12 steps are a beautiful adjunct to a recovering life. The principles, the theories, the ideas, the behavioral changes you can make with the 12 steps are significant. But if we're really honest, as clinical leaders of young people, we know fundamentally that young people do not, at their core, want more authority figures in their life. They do not want more God, steps, sponsors. They don't want that. They need it. We know they need it. And we historically have put it in all of their treatment plans. We know this. But if we're really honest as clinicians, we have to recognize that there's going to be a natural pushback on asking for more authority figures to enter their life. Okay, we have to be honest. Listen, it's never been easier, as I mentioned, to check out 12-step because you can do so without leaving your home. But the idea that a 17-year-old boy, fresh out of rehab for 2.5 months, is going to actively invite someone else into their life to tell them what to do is suspect at best. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm a person who has used the 12 steps to promote my own well-being. But I'm also a person who has watched thousands of adolescents in treatment push back on that issue. And for me to hammer it home as a law is just not, that's not a clinically sophisticated approach, in my opinion. What is a better approach is understanding that they may tolerate some ideas, but they're not in fact going to invite in an army of more adult authority figures to tell them what to do. It's kind of like watching, you don't have to love rap music, Tommy, or
I don't.
You don't have to love their style of dress or the choice in music, but you have to understand it. You can't just outright dismiss it anymore. And so when I think about young people, I'm always trying to pursue cultural literacy. I want to understand what makes them tick. I want to understand their language. I want to understand their psychodynamics. The whole psychological construct of later adolescence is individuation and separation from adults, mainly their parents, but adults, and developing their own identity. Inserting more adult authority figures into that equation has an impact that they can't tolerate fully, is how I would suggest that construct and that dynamic be approached. So we can have small victories, but the idea that they're going to take on a sponsor who's going to live and breathe with them and tell them exactly what to do is a little bit far-fetched.
Thanks, Dave. I'm going to throw this out to both of you. Are home drug tests effective, and do you recommend doing this if you only suspect usage?
So,
oh, you go, Dave, sorry.
I mean, it's funny you asked that, man. The other day, a sales rep, Tommy, for one of these home drug testing kits showed up, believe it or not, at Caron in my office. So I spit on the floor and I threw him out. I told him never to come back, man, because no, I'm kidding, man. I can't tell if people are laughing right now or like giving me the finger. You know what I mean? But like, listen, drug testing there's a significant piece to drug testing that we should talk about. Can a home drug test be effective? It can be a deterrent. If I'm a kid and I know I could be tested by mom and dad at any moment, sure, that could be helpful. But we as an industry and as industry leaders need to educate families on some of the flaws. Kids can easily fake a drug test. They can dilute their system. They can get fake pee from a friend. They can heat it up and dump it in the thing. Unless you're willing to watch your son or daughter actually pee in the cup, which could be awkward. The other thing is if you get the result, it could be positive or negative. But in our world, positive or negative is a start, but I need to know the amount of the habit. And so the more effective drug testing is the one that you send away to a lab that gives you levels of THC, levels of cocaine, levels of heroin. It gives you a much better view into the actual appetite and habit of the individual in question. Okay, if you just get positive and negative, you can't differentiate a kid who smoked weed twice versus a kid who smokes weed twice in the morning every day and then 5 more times throughout the day. They're the same. And so I like the more sophisticated approach is a send away drug kit that comes back with actual levels of the drug in the system.
And I agree with you, Dave, on this. I also think that it's very, I mean, you're creating, as you had said, you're creating already, it's a higher, the environment can be very, now you're living at home with your children, it's already escalated. Now you're the one, you know, the parent who's implementing the the drug testing. You're the one, the judge, the juror, you know, and you're creating this conflict, this challenge that, although it's a reality that you want to know, as most parents I'm working with, they want to know, is there some real data of how's my child doing in recovery, right? And having the, or how's my child doing, you know, under the contract or terms that we're expecting, you know, in some place, not calling it recovery, but just saying, hey, we're expecting you to be drug-free. And I think that you're really putting yourself in what I see with the families are really difficult situations that they become the monitor. That's a lot to handle, you know, it's a lot to expect. And, you know, my fear when you say that, Tommy, is that, you know, families or kids that or individuals that need therapy and need a higher level of care aren't going to get it because maybe some families are afraid, rightfully so, in this COVID-19 time of their child. They feel like they have to make a choice between, you know, sending their child off to a higher level of care and getting them exposed, or keeping them at home, and who knows what can happen. So I just really want to go back to what Dave said about, you know, that there are best practice facilities that are open that are able to deal in this kind of multidisciplinary way to address not only the COVID-19 but also the whole components of your child's clinical process. So if you're going to have to make a choice between you running your own treatment center and then your child needing that treatment center, I would say that if you get to that point, you may really want to look to your therapist and look to your clinical team to decide, hey, this is not sustainable.
Thanks, Jonathan. So probably have time for one more question. And Dave, you might have touched upon this earlier, but I just want to clarify, is Caron taking patients from all parts of the United States?
Tommy, we are taking patients from all parts of the United States. Listen, we have the advantage of having a state-of-the-art medical facility, 10 doctors, and 50 nurses who work around the clock. And so when I expressed to the audience and you earlier, our ability to confidently take patients from everywhere, including hot zones like New York and New Jersey, which historically are two of our bigger feeder areas. We still take them, they still rely on us. We have the ability to take, test, and isolate these people for a period of 12 to 24 hours. And the one case that was positive, we were able to isolate for 8 days successfully without exposing other staff or other patients. For years, the budget of our medical department has been a source of concern for for some of the execs or the CFO. We spend an extraordinary amount of money on doctors and nurses at Caron, and for years it's been a sort of an eye raiser, an eyebrow raiser, but it's never been more beneficial than this very moment. It's allowing us to continue to treat in the most clinically and medically sophisticated fashion, and frankly, leave the door open when so many other places have obstacles and restrictions in relation to getting into treatment and the appropriate level of care.
Thank you, Dave. And Jonathan, Renaissance is also open for business, correct?
Correct. Caron Renaissance, which is located in Florida, where we have a number of young adults that are engaging in higher education while in a level of care. We're still open, and they're still, and we're doing a great work with what we're doing. So thank you.
Perfect. Well, that concludes our webinar for today. Dave and Jonathan, thank you very much for taking the time out today and answering all of those questions. We encourage you to be in touch with your local regional resource director should you have any additional questions. And please join us next Tuesday, April 28th at 11 a.m. for the next webinar in our series. Registration is open for these webinars. Watch for more information in your email. Thank you again, everybody that attended. Take care, be healthy, and be safe.
Thank you.